The US President Donald Trump has arrived in Qatar after meeting the Syrian leader Ahmed al-Shara in Riyadh. He's promised to lift all sanctions on Syria to give the country a chance at greatness. The announcement prompted enthusiastic cheers across Syria, with people spilling into the streets of major cities to celebrate. Meanwhile, President Trump is continuing to sign multiple deals. The latest in Qatar includes a $200 billion order for Boeing planes. In Saudi Arabia, he signed commercial agreements worth more than $600 billion. The White House says the deal is the largest sales agreement of its kind in history. We have an assessment. And here in Nigeria, the Senate has passed a resolution calling on the Tinubu administration to ensure that local government councils are included as members in the Federation Account Allocation Committee. The lawmakers say this will help to guarantee their direct involvement in the revenue allocation process. We have analysis. Plus, there's new evidence that chimpanzees treat their injuries with medicinal plants. British scientists followed two groups of self-medicating chimps in the Bodongo forest, cataloguing what they describe as forest first aid. First tonight, the leaders of the United States and Syria have met for the first time in 25 years. Donald Trump and Ahmed al-Shara's brief meeting in Riyadh happened hours after Washington's surprise decision to lift sanctions on Syria. During the brief talks, the White House said Mr. Trump had urged the Syrian president to normalize ties with Israel. Correspondents say that since toppling Bashar al-Assad from power last year, Mr. al-Shara has been assiduous in trying to convince foreign leaders that he represents the new hope for Syria's future, despite his jihadist past. But they say meeting the US president represents the biggest coup yet on the world stage. And for the first time in decades, Syria has hope, its people can rebuild, and millions of refugees can return to their homes.
We are currently exploring normalizing relations with Syria's new government, as you know, beginning with my meeting with President Ahmed al-Shara and Secretary Rubio's meeting with the Syrian foreign minister in Turkey after discussing the situation with Crown Prince Mohammed and President Erdogan of Turkey. I am also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start. It gives them a chance for greatness. The sanctions were really crippling, very powerful. I greatly appreciate the constructive role that the leaders in this room have played in trying to bring the terrible conflict to an end, including by helping secure the release of American hostage Idan Alexander. It was a big day yesterday, a very important day. I was told just before I left that they were going to be releasing Idan. We thought Idan was dead. 3 weeks ago, they said Idan was no longer living. And it was a very, very good thing. Ultimately, all hostages of all nationalities must be released as a stepping stone to peace. And I think it's going to be happening. A lot of things are happening.
Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has arrived in Doha, where he signed a $200 billion order for Boeing planes. Before he left Riyadh, he and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman signed commercial agreements worth more than $600 billion. The White House says the deal, which includes a defense package worth over $140 billion, is the largest sales agreement of its kind in history. Many of the big names of American business are traveling with Mr. Trump, from Elon Musk to the presidents of Boeing and Google to the chief executive of Amazon and IBM. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from New York by the deputy editor of investing at Business Insider, Akin Oyedele. Good to see you, Akin. And is it fair to say that even in terms of The Saudis and the US, who are used to rather big deals, I mean, these latest deals that have been agreed are mighty big numbers.
Absolutely, that's fair to say. And thanks for having me on. The defense agreement, for example, or the agreement to sell defense equipment to Saudi Arabia is valued about $142 billion. And the US says that there hasn't been a larger military agreement in its history. So that's absolutely colossal. And that's just a portion of about $600 billion that Saudi Arabia has pledged to invest in the US economy in the coming years. That includes investments in things like AI and energy infrastructure. And that also includes the commitment of about $80 billion from companies like Google and Oracle and Uber in both countries. So, absolutely, these are huge numbers. Of course, it's important to emphasize that a lot of these are commitments, and so this isn't money that has switched hands yet per se. But even in terms of just the handshaking gesture of it all, the sort of symbolism of agreeing to eventually invest these numbers in both countries, absolutely, this is big.
Just listening to your breakdown there, I mean, it sounds like defense and tech are high up there as particular sectors that are going to greatly benefit.
Absolutely, and if you think of President Trump's priorities, it makes sense why these are the two areas of focus for him. On defense, President Trump, right from his first term, has taken an America First approach to foreign policy, and that includes making sure that America's interests domestically and abroad are secure, particularly in terms of its borders and its national security. And so by equipping the Saudis to defend themselves, you're equipping a key ally in that region of the world to not only defend itself, but to defend American interests in the region. And then in terms of tech, President Trump is the business president, the president who had the tech CEOs in a front row position at his inauguration. And so this is a way, once again, to boost a key part of the US economy that, if we look at the stock market, for example, it is dominated by big tech companies in terms of market cap. And so defense and tech are two areas that just naturally fit President Trump's vision for America and what he believes America's best interests, where he believes America's best interests lie.
And as we all know, Akin, even when friends and business partners meet, there are inevitably some frictions. What would you say were the difficult areas? What were the challenges in a region fraught with challenges?
Sure. I mean, the any sort of embrace of Saudi Arabia by the US is going to be criticized because Saudi Arabia does not quite have a clean track record when it comes to human rights. And so that has been one of the things that has come up in this and in previous discussions. It's the idea that, the US, which is this beacon of democracy and human rights, is, essentially getting in bed, for lack of a better term, with another country that doesn't have such a good track record and is sort of turning a blind eye to some of the incidents that have occurred in the past. And then, of course, another thing to flag is that the US is essentially selling a lot of this equipment to a country and to a region that is pretty physically far removed. And so it raises questions about just how stable, that region ends up being. If the US is essentially giving toys, for lack of a better term, to Saudi Arabia and saying, use these in your and our best interests. It's different from the US itself having full control over those planes and defense materials. And so that is again another point of criticism about this whole affair.
And I mean, are you also expecting to see other big deals? I mean, we talked about Qatar just a minute ago. Perhaps not as big, but also big deals in Qatar and the UAE as President Trump continues his trade positive trip.
We absolutely could. He's taken these tech presidents and CEOs along for a reason. Part of it, of course, is the optics of having some of the biggest uh, leaders of industry in the same room and in the same photos with him. Trump is somebody who doesn't turn down a good photo op. But beyond that, there definitely will be conversations between these leaders and their counterparts in that region. And so I would expect, some announcements, even if they don't come directly from the White House. There could be investments that those companies make strategically in that region where their own business interests are concerned outside of sort of what President Trump and the White House is gunning for. And then, we also know that Trump is in the middle of a trade war with essentially the rest of the world. And so we could also expect some trade agreements announced with any of these countries that he's visiting, if that comes on the table.
And I'm not sure whether I heard you mention this, but there's a bit of controversy over that Boeing 747 plane called the Palace in the Air that's been offered to President Trump. I mean, do you expect him to sort of tuck it under his arm and come home with it at the end of this trip?
Well, that remains to be seen. It definitely is unusual for a U.S. president to accept, let alone fly in an aircraft that was gifted by a foreign entity. But we also know that Trump is not one to follow convention, and he's one to break the precedent. Already, this trip is a departure from the tradition of the U.S. president visiting Canada or the UK, or one of those closer allies, first in a new term. So, I wish I had a firm answer on that, but perhaps at the end of the day, it'll come down to what the Secret Service and other parts of the U.S. defense apparatus insist President Trump does. I think they uh, likely have the final say here, and that ultimately will determine whether Trump A brings this back to the US, and B actually flies in it.
Well, I mean, not to worry, none of us have the answer, and nobody seems to know, actually. The White House have defended it, saying that there's nothing illegal or unconstitutional about it. But, I mean, this trip to the Middle East, I mean, is it all about just money, deals, and that's it? I mean, nothing political? I mean, I know you're not a political correspondent, and I don't want to sort of put you on the spot there, so you can certainly ignore that question if you want to. But I mean, will Gaza, where Qatar is a major mediator, likely be a big subject of discussion?
I mean, it will be. Part of the purpose of this trip is to expand the so-called Abrahamic Accord, which is seeking to normalize relations between Israel and Arab states. So, I'd imagine that that's a point of discussion. And, like you say, those are very complex diplomatic endeavors. I don't think that that's completely off the table here. But you also have to sort of think about why Trump has made this his first big foreign trip. And well, besides obviously going to the Pope's funeral the other week, which is unplanned, but this is his first intentional trip abroad. And when you think about his administration's priorities in terms of securing the border and boosting the US economy and putting the domestic agenda first, yes, politics are involved, but I think it ultimately is about making sure that the flow of money and the deals serve America's interests in terms of defense and in terms of its economy.
And I mean, what's been the reaction in America where you are to this trip?
Well, I think people are more focused on the trade war overall. And again, this is money that's these countries are agreeing to invest. And so, it doesn't really have that much of a direct impact yet on the average person on the street. And so it's not sort of the big talk of the town or of the country at all. I think the thing that people are more focused on that is likely to have a more immediate and potentially severe impact is the tariffs on China and other countries. Over the weekend, we got really good news that things have de-escalated significantly, but you're still looking at a 30% tariff on China and a 10% tariff on the rest of the world. And that is likely going to start to show up in the prices that we pay for things that we use, and things like technology and food and what have you. And so that is still very much the focus of folks. I think this trip, again, because it's more about the symbolism and about putting ink on paper, we won't see the effect of that anytime soon. And so it, at the end of the day, what affects the wallet more immediately that people are worrying about, and that's tariffs.
Indeed, and I want to thank you very much indeed for the time that you've taken to talk to us. Akin Oyedele is the Deputy Editor of Investing at Business Insider. He was talking to me on the line there from New York. Thank you very much indeed.